In 1950, the Korean War officially began when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea on June 25th. Conflict between North and South had been brewing for decades because of differences in how the people responded to Japanese rule, with those in the South often working with their oppressors and those in the North resisting them. Nevertheless, the North Korean forces steamrolled through South Korea, capturing Seoul in days and pushing the South Koreans all the way to the coast. It's important to understand what both sides were fighting for, and this is where we learn about their respective leaders. The South was led by Syngman Rhee, while the North had, and technically still has, Kim Il-sung. These were two very complex and different people, except for the fact that they both wanted the exact same thing: a unified Korea under their rule. Seeing the situation in Korea, the United Nations quickly responded, led by the US, which at the time was driven entirely by a fear of communism. They landed in droves and pushed the North Koreans back to the border, with the aid of a daring naval landing at Incheon near Seoul. In fact, they were doing so well that they just kept pushing north, until they were doing too well, and China worried they were in danger. So they poured hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers into North Korea, and pushed everything essentially back to where it had started. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur urged President Truman to nuke the Chinese, which he refused to do now that Russia also had nukes. The war ended in 1953 with a ceasefire that is still technically in place, with the demilitarized zone between the nations still being a very dangerous place. Despite the seeming simplicity and brevity of the so-called Forgotten War, millions of people died and atrocities were committed on both sides. It's easy today to point at the communist North Koreans as the aggressors and the bad guys. However, this conflict was certainly not black and white, with both halves of the peninsula under the thumb of ruthless dictators who hated each other and led to the people suffering. However, not everything was so hopeless. In one incident, a miracle in logistics and human connection, 14,000 Koreans were saved by one single U.S. ship, which kept all of them fed and comfortable for several days. Not a single person died, and in fact, 5 people were born on the miracle ship. The legacy of the Korean War is as clear as the island of lights from space, with the border's stark contrast as clear as night and day.